Okay, hello. Welcome to Bleus Literary Salon, the virtual edition. I want to say a huge thanks to all of you for calling in. I know that there are a lot of new people on today, so I want to welcome all of you. And just as a bit of background, Bleus was founded a little over, sorry, it's so bright. Anyway, Bleus was founded a little over 6 years ago in New York City, and it was hosted every single month until this past October. And the special thing about Les Bleus was we'd be in a different person's apartment every month with 4 different readers. So you'd get a chance to see some great New York City real estate and listen to some amazing authors read from their books. And then since the pandemic started, I thought it would be nice to bring it online and bring everybody together, and also to help a lot of the people who have not been able to have their book tours because they've been canceled. And tonight we have 5 amazing readers. We have Nina, Renata, Aron, we have Rebecca White, we have Sopan Deb, we have Nancy Starr, and we have Ivy Pochoda. And so I'm going to ask everyone to mute their microphones if you're not Nina. And I'm going to pass it over to Nina to start us off. Thanks, Nina.
Hi, thank you so much, Paige. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be able to read and be at a reading on a Saturday night in spite of everything. Thanks so much for having me. My book is called Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls, a memoir of women, addiction, and love. It's my debut, and it was published by Crown on April 21st. So I did have the canceled book tour experience, but I've been enjoying doing a lot of virtual events like this. The book is, it's a memoir, but it's also sort of a cultural history about women living alongside alcoholism and addiction. It's sort of meant to be the first literary memoir of codependency. I was always looking for a book like this. I grew up in a family where I had a sister who struggled with heroin addiction when we were teenagers and in our 20s, and I went on to have romantic relationships with men with substance problems, and the one in this book is a long relationship I had with an ex who was addicted to heroin and crack and alcohol, and but I was always looking for a sort of literary treatment of this other experience, this other side of addiction, this very bewildering experience of living with addiction in our households and relationships, which is a distinct thing. The part of the book I'm going to read from tonight is, it's only a tiny bit of a spoiler, but I left my home in New Jersey as a teenager and drove across country with best friends to live in San Francisco for a year. And that's where I met this boyfriend who would resurface many years later and upend my life. But I had to come back from San Francisco to New Jersey when my sister, who was struggling with addiction, her fiance died of an overdose. So I'm 18 and back home in New Jersey after leaving California. At home, it turned out that my parents had lost their minds. Fear and worry and grief had combined to form a temporary insanity that rendered them tender, ultra-present, and completely distracted at the same time. My dad hadn't moved back in, but he hadn't not moved back in. I don't remember where my mother's boyfriend was. Had he been sent away? That wouldn't surprise me. Ours was the type of family that banished outsiders and closed ranks in the event of emergency. It seemed for a period of weeks that we were always all together, the original 5. My parents on the phone, accessing their network of doctors, directors of programs and facilities, and others with cultural capital, connections, wisdom to share. Someone knew someone who knew someone. Jews are breathtaking to behold in a crisis. We had a leg up, whiteness, money to borrow, doctors to call, and still drugs had proven indiscriminate. We operated as though they could take her at any moment. In another house far away, Lorenzo's family was busy with their own phone calls, except for flowers, a casket, a priest. There was no one left for them to worry over, nobody, no body to save. And the guilt of this disparity, the narrow, twisted fork of fate by which someone else's child had been sold the bad batch, also fed my parents' madness. It was April, and the San Francisco flora to which I'd grown accustomed, Technicolor California wild roses and poppies, flowering vines in fuchsia, hot orange, and carmine red, crawling up cracked apricot stucco walls. All had been replaced. In New Jersey, everything looked like a Sopranos set and felt like childhood. Cement, low skies pitching forward, spinning carousel-like. Intermittently, a timid scatter of crocus or daffodils, quaintly teasing the dawning spring. There was familiarity in every root and pattern, like wallpaper memorized from a crib. It was there in the grand castle-like houses up on the hill and in the modest box-like ones at the bottom, made of red brick and aluminum siding in a limited array of muted breakfast hues, butter, oatmeal, coffee with cream. We ordered takeout and cried, drove in pairs to Watchung Plaza for 20-ounce hazelnut coffees we grayed with skim milk and sesame bagels with cream cheese. CVS on Valley Road for tissues, Tampax, Visine. Then returned to the fold and became again the five of us in the bunker of our erstwhile family home. Every room had been beautified to my mother's elevated rustic specifications, and I skulked around makeupless in an old t-shirt and pajama bottoms, savoring it. For 8 months, I had been living in the damply foreign paradise of Northern California, in an ever-changing climate that sent my internal thermostat spinning, and I still had not adjusted. No diurnal rhythm had been established in the chill of that twinkling elsewhere, a verdant city where Rachel, Kat, and I were totally free and making it on our own, pooling what we could earn and what we could steal from our 6 jobs. Back home, I remembered what it felt like to not have to be responsible for myself. I'd missed the suburban safety. There was a neat stack of clean towels in the linen closet and an endlessly renewing store of string cheese and non-fat yogurt in the fridge. Big brown boxes of sourdough pretzels stood sentinel in the pantry. Even beneath the shroud of grief, everything felt abundant, paid for by someone else. It filled me with shame that I could enjoy the special lockdown coziness of even tragic, extenuating circumstances. Times like these should be the inverse of holidays, but they feel an awful lot like holidays. I liked the forced closeness, the reliable swelling of feeling, hushed planning, being altered by that sudden lurch into intimacy. I liked being among my people, a kind of going to the mattresses. That was an old mafia phrase my mother had taught us as kids. I assumed she got it from The Godfather. It was what the mob bosses did when they were going to war against a rival family, when they needed to be out of sight and be able to keep an eye on one another. They would lie in wait someplace and strategize, ready themselves for action. I liked the extemporary make-do domesticity evoked by the phrase, a family closeness that arose urgently, that was imbued with sudden purpose. We weren't going to war, but our clustering together in trauma could feel that way. It could make you feel cupped inside a hand. I remember the time a few years earlier, before she threw the party while my parents were out of town, when Lucia went to see a band in Pennsylvania with friends and a 12 o'clock curfew and never came home. I was in 8th grade at the time, Lucia a sophomore in high school. I woke in the morning to find my parents frantic, my mother looking somehow gaunt and haunted after the one lost night of sleep. My father was on the phone with the police. They'd already called hospitals in 2 states. No information, which could be good or bad. Even the breakfast dishes looked different. I sat at the table and joined in the worrying, telling my mother it was going to be all right. You don't know that, she said, her brow drawn up like a mime in exaggerated concern. Everything was all right in the sense that Lucia resurfaced. She had spent the night partying in a motel room with some friends, and my parents' relief that she was not found lying in the proverbial ditch superseded their anger, although I remember she was eventually punished. The feeling in the house that morning was a beginning. Up to that point, we'd been good girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nina. I'm so excited to read this book. I've heard so many amazing things about it. I've been a little bit nervous because I've experienced some pretty horrifying addicts in my life, but I'm very excited to have this perspective. And I know that I was on the reading you did last night as well. So I've been with you after 1 a.m. in Nairobi 2 nights in a row. And I really liked that what you said, to let everybody else know that you said that this was the book that you had wished you had access to when you were experiencing these kinds of things and living with this sort of trauma and chaos in your life. And so I think it's so wonderful that you've now given that to the world.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to share in the chat box the link to Nina's book here so that everyone can order it. Thank you again, Nina. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca White.
Thank you, Paige. I'm actually going to be reading the end of a short fiction story that I wrote. The story is about an 87-year-old man who still lives independently alone in a small city apartment. He's only recently starting to grapple with dementia, but what helps him stay afloat is his collection of art and photographs that are hung around the apartment. Where we enter, he has just gotten off the phone with his son, who checks in on him regularly. And this story is called, "Who is that man?" The old man went to the bathroom. Walking back to his bed, he passed the desk his phone was on. Above the desk was a large framed mirror that seemed to him at times to be playing a movie that never ended. In the movie, an old man much like himself would stare back at him, his various shirts changing, but his expression always staying the same, one of silly bewilderment. Who is that man, he'd think, sometimes joking, sometimes truly uncertain of the answer. Then he'd walk away. This evening, after exiting the bathroom, he walked past the mirror, disinterested in the man. He headed steadily toward his bed out of habit. His feet below him moved like slugs, lacking speed and barely lifting off the ground. They'd made him trip on sidewalk curbs and up and down staircases and even fall. But he never broke a bone, so he was the winner there. When he lay back on his bed, he could see that the TV was still on. The loud sound in the TV was still too much, and the people were still moving and yapping and taking up space in his eyes. He couldn't remember where the clicker was. Then he found it under a blanket. He hit a button, and the people disappeared. But he wasn't alone. He turned his eyes to the more quiet visions that hung on his walls, and he admired them. He admired the painting his father did of his mother in 1929, and his mother, in turn, admired him. She always admired him, he noticed, and their continued connection reminded him of being a kid back in Vermont. His mother had that way about her that had always made him feel protected. His mother had admired her son from her perch on his wall, just as she had watched him play in their dirt driveway during scorching summers and in the high snow piles that overtook the roads and the lawn and almost sunk her favorite tree with its clingy, soppy weight. She'd grown up with that tree outside her bedroom window. This was her childhood home, and the tree, once only as tall as she was her childhood tree. His mother admired her son, now so grown he was as stately as an elder tree himself in her eyes. But she also admired the art on his other walls. Above his bed was a French oil reproduction, framed by her son's friend 65 years ago as a gift. Its muted blues and blacks and whites, its houses and its cliffs and trees, encouraged her to leave her spot on the wall by the kitchen and visit the warm French countryside. But that would be a silly scene, wouldn't it? His mother with her bright yellow blouse walking those sad navy streets, or standing atop the gray-white cliffs that warned lost women like her of a permanent end if they wandered too close to their age. Silly indeed. If his mother turned her head to the right, she saw another bluish painting, but not just in color. The disconsolate blues of Picasso's Tragedy hung above a small bookshelf near her son's dresser. She beheld a woman in midnight blue, much like herself, a man in ashy blue like her husband, and a young teal-coated boy like her own son when he was that age. The three commiserated on a beach as gentle waves threatened to tickle their toes in a nearby snapshot of time that would never be recorded. But what comforted his mother most were the other paintings and drawings done by her husband that offered windows of their own into a man's mind her son wouldn't have known well were they never created. Her son's father was a very private man. When they were first married, he'd ramble into the wild Vermont woods and surely must have been consumed by the sad prescience of the pine and spruce fir forests. The impression they made has lasted now almost 100 years, quite a feat, the trees with their secrets having worked their way from his eyes through his hands onto paper. 3 forest scenes survive now on her son's walls, still not giving anything they once knew away. Her son would watch these ink sketches as she would, and everything would come flooding back to him. Like, "Mother, do you remember the time Charlie ran down the street and I went running after him? That wasn't just one time. No, it was many times. He never wore a leash. But my father didn't run after the dog at all, did he? He stayed upstairs in his study reading. Here his son closed his eyes. Not to sleep, however. He wasn't tired anymore. Actually, he was antsy. He missed being a kid. He missed being at home with his family, with his mom and dad. He missed the sound of the Vermont wind and the birds and the way candles looked in dark corners full of people reading books. Nobody used candles anymore. Did he have any candles? Wasn't it just his birthday? His phone rang again. Slowly, he got up from his bed and walked the short distance back to his desk, but before he could answer it, he heard the doorbell, a hollow clunking sound that didn't appeal to him. To make it stop, he answered that instead. Standing right in front of him was a woman he knew from down the hall. Her name was Rhoda. "I brought you some food. My aunt couldn't finish it all, and we wouldn't want to waste it," she said, handing him a plate of chicken and mashed potatoes covered in plastic wrap. "Oh my, thank you, Rhoda," he said, taking the plate. "Sure, dear. And it's Cheryl." "Goodbye, dear," he said feistily. And he shut the door, feeling suddenly so hungry that his stomach hurt. He carried the plate of food into the kitchen and placed it onto the counter. He took out a knife from a drawer and peeled off the plastic. The plastic irritated him, and sauce dripped onto his shirt as he tried to throw it away. It was sticky and soggy, and when he let it go from his fingers, it landed halfway in the trash and halfway out of it. How annoying. But boy, was he hungry. Thank goodness Rhoda showed up. The food was still hot, sort of. He ate it while standing at the counter as a large slate-colored painting of a man in armor looked on from the other room. Henry was his name. His old pal Bill, who painted the Grand Oil, wasn't alive anymore, but Henry still was. "You hungry, Henry? Well, it's not as good as it looks," he yelled across the room. Stomach now full, he felt quite tired and sad. He wished he wasn't alone. He wished he was a kid back in his house in Vermont. He wished he could turn the corner on and see his dad reading a book by candlelight. Hang on a minute. Did he have any candles? He looked in the silverware drawer and got lucky. He found a small box of kids' birthday candles. Am I 90? He took them out, then tried to find some matches. He couldn't find any, so he turned on one of the stove's gas burners and poked the wick of a small pink candle into its flame. Feeling sneaky but having fun, he then carried the lit candle over to the bookshelf by the bed, his feet dragging in a pair of plaid socks thin from too many washes. He lifted the tiny pink candle up close to some of the books so he could re-examine his collection, but he wasn't wearing his reading glasses. Hang on a minute, I need my reading glasses, he thought. He then turned to his left to look for them on the bed. To see if they were on his bed, he needed to sit. As he lowered his body, he remembered he needed to use both hands to keep steady. It was then that he decided to put down the candle on the table by his bed. At first, he didn't even notice the flames coming from the tissue box. His eyes and hands were busy lifting blankets and pillows and clickers in search for his glasses. But when one of the blankets landed on the burning tissue box, itself now a heap of blossoming reds, oranges, and blues, he could see his terrible mistake. He could see a fire growing. It reminded him of camping with his cousins as a kid. It reminded him of marshmallows and melting chocolate. He got up and stepped back from the bed to watch the fire as it moved. This was bad. Before he knew it, his campfire was lapping up his French reproduction, scaring the townspeople that were surely watching from the painted villas among the cliffs. The fire was moving steadily through his life. It was reading his books. It was warming the cold blue family by the ocean that Picasso had kept so cold on purpose. They weren't meant to be warmed by God. He pulled backward even further, almost reaching his desk. He turned his eyes to his left as his Henry's armor failed to protect him from being engulfed. The smoke was starting to build as it occurred to him to take the painting of his mother. The fire hadn't reached the kitchen yet, nor the wall where she was surely looking down in disapproval of her son. Why is this happening? I guess it's time to go, he thought. He was so sad, he lifted the small portrait of his mother off the wall easily and put it under his arm. The front door was along the same wall as the kitchen, and a clear path with no fire and no smoke led right to safety. As he slid his feet across the linoleum, he took one last look in the mirror above his desk. He saw the same old man looking back at him. The old man was crying and holding his father's watercolor painting, the one he painted of his mother after meeting her for the very first time. His mother, it seemed, was also crying. And then the heat became too much almost for him to bear. And so he opened the front door and he walked away. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Wow, that was so detailed and so vivid. That was really easy to get sucked right into that story. Thank you so much. Am I frozen? Or, no, you're still here. Okay, sorry. Sometimes it freezes and I don't know if it's me or. I'm gonna post. So, Rebecca, do you want to tell us about the link I'm sharing?
It is a really wonderful organization. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So it's called Hearts to Homes, and it's a nonprofit. It's a really wonderful nonprofit that I know really well. My boyfriend's sister works with them, and it's just a really good place. I think it's Foster Care Awareness Month. So especially right now with COVID, it's just helpful to give to them.
Yeah, I think that's the link for the Foster Awareness Month.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much.
And then when Rebecca's book of short stories comes out, we're going to update everybody.
Yes.
Yes. For now, Hearts to Homes, right?
Yes, Hearts to Homes, yeah.
Awesome. So I put the link in there. And thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Sopan Deb. Sopan, over to you.
Thank you. Paige, thank you so much for having me. Everyone, wherever you are, safe. And again, thank you for being here, and to the other wonderful readers. My book's called Mistranslations, Meeting the Immigrant Parents Who Raised Me. So the book tracks a year of my life as I try to track down my parents who, at the time I began writing this book, I had not seen my dad in 11 years and my mom in 5 years. I didn't know where they were living. And the book explores a lot of themes of South Asian culture, immigrant culture, assimilation, mental health treatment, etc. So this passage comes later in the book and talks about a story from the past, which I will read now. When I was in elementary school, I became obsessed with professional wrestling. I had to watch in secret, though, because I knew my parents would approve of me idolizing oiled-up grown men who fake hit each other with metal chairs. My favorite performer was this guy, Paul White, better known today as Big Show. White is less a guy and more the human manifestation of an oil tanker. At one point in his career, clocking in at more than 400 pounds. Every time he entered the ring, his opponents would quake with fear, or, pretend to. A single punch from him would cartoonishly launch opponents to the other side of the ring. And if they weren't being slammed to the canvas, Big Show would headbutt them to another dimension. At home, I used to take multiple pillows, stuff them inside each other, and create dummies to body slam. I created elaborate scenarios where I would, quote, fight A-list wrestlers like Kane, The Undertaker, and my favorite, The Big Show. My finishing move was the Hellraiser, which involved putting a pillow in a headlock, lifting it up over my right shoulder, and then pile driving it into the mat, which was, in this case, my bed. I didn't have wrestling tights, so I used to run around in only my underwear. It was a bizarre sight for both of my parents, who knew little about half-naked men fake fighting each other as a form of entertainment, or that I even watched them. I composed my own theme song on the keyboard, which was not bad, actually, and I delivered promos with an imaginary microphone. Hey, Big Show, when Sopan Deb gets you in the ring, he's going to raise some hell. I gravitated to performers like Big Show because he was everything I wasn't. I was scrawny and afraid of physical confrontations. Hey, you would be too if you were my size. Put me against someone with a heartbeat, I'm the guy seeing my life flash in front of my eyes as Big Show enters the ring. No more raising hell for me. I have, however, been in one physical altercation in my life that didn't involve my parents. It was during 8th grade, a year where my mother had locked herself in her room and it was just my father, Shamal, taking care of me. There was this one classmate I had, we'll call him Gary, who was not well liked by anybody. He was always making inappropriate and demeaning comments to those around him. Gary was troubled and not well adjusted at an already difficult age for boys. He was disruptive in class, and his frequent antics seemed to come from a place of malice. I'm almost 2 decades older now, and in hindsight, it's clear Gary was battling some demons that he didn't even understand at the time. Come to think of it, I was too. One morning, we were milling around in the classroom waiting for the first class of the day to start. I was in the back of the room doing something, maybe playing on the computer, when Gary made some unprovoked comments towards me. It was something derogatory about a turban. I didn't hear him at first, but he repeated it. This was shortly after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Every now and then, some other students would say it was my relatives who flew a plane into the World Trade Center. I cannot say this enough. I was scrawny. I never picked fights. But something came over me in this moment. The backdrop of my home life had put me in such an angry place, and manliness was very much a topic of discussion among the cool kids. I'd hear classmates talk with great admiration about fights that others got into, and the toughness with which they fought. I was uncool, but desired very much to be the opposite. In this moment, I thought that getting into a fight would raise my status. I walked to the front of the classroom where Gary was standing, and I clocked him in the face, a right hook to his left cheek. My classmates were stunned. Gary, after initially falling backward over a chair, was also stunned. I stared at my fists as if a comic book movie villain had taken control of them. Gary ran out of the classroom to tell a teacher, and I was immediately taken to a vice principal's office, where I offered my side of the story. Our reputations were weighed. I had never been in a fight in school, but Gary had. While I was known for acting up in class, I had great grades. Gary didn't. It was believable that Gary was the instigator. When the decision was made to suspend me for 2 days, and him for at least a couple more, maybe a week, the vice principal called my father to tell him what happened, that he had to come pick me up from school. My father would have to leave work early. Remember how I never called my parents to tell them that I had been arrested while covering Donald Trump? Let me tell you, you definitely don't want to be the brown kid who calls his parents to tell them about a school suspension, ever. In Shamal's car, we were silent the entire ride. He didn't ask what happened, and I didn't try to explain. I was steeling myself to be told what a disappointment I was, how I would never get into college, how a school suspension is the equivalent of a felony, but there were no words, not even from the radio. Shamal was expressionless. Instead of turning toward our house, he drove to Route 9, the local New Jersey highway, and he kept driving. I thought this was the end of my life. He was going to murder me. After about 25 minutes of driving, he turned right onto an exit ramp. We entered a parking lot I knew well in Freehold, a neighboring town. The shopping plaza had the Freehold Grand Buffet, a bloated Chinese restaurant, and one of my favorite dining establishments. Shamal exited the car and walked towards the restaurant. He was still quiet. I followed him. Maybe this is the last meal before the execution, I thought. The restaurant was mostly empty, since most folks were at school or at work. After the waiter took our drink orders, we went to the buffet to get food. I loaded up my plate. If this was to be my last meal, I was headed to the afterlife on a full stomach. When we sat down, Shamal looked intently at me. Speaking softly, he said that he understood why I reacted the way I did to what Gary said. But he also said that I was wrong, that I never should have laid hands on him, no matter what Gary said. At the end of the day, a racist crack from a 13-year-old wasn't more dangerous than a sucker punch to the face. He said all of this without a hint of malice in his voice. He wasn't trying to guilt me. Instead, he took on the soft demeanor of a professor. Shamal was trying to use this as a teaching moment. Yet all I felt was isolation. My father should be angry at me. Why is he downplaying this? In a very Admiral Akbar voice, I said to myself, "It's a trap." Several minutes passed, and my mindset realigned. I went from puzzlement to shame. Instead of being angry, Shamal was empathetic, a side I rarely saw. I realized he was right, and the school administration was wrong. Gary shouldn't have been suspended after getting punched in the face and then telling a teacher about it. I was wrong. There was no excuse for my behavior. My father put that in perspective for me right away. He was calm, which did not give me the opportunity to get defensive. He was soothing, but stern. It was his greatest moment as a father. Although, like many things he did, it went unappreciated at the time. Weeks later, I walked upstairs from my basement and I watched my father getting into a police car. It was the last time we lived together. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me again.
You've left us on such a exciting moment. We all need to know what happens next. Thank you so much, Sopan. I like we can see the hashtag trending in our comments from Michael, the Team Punch Gary. That was a really great excerpt. Thank you so much for reading that. And I haven't read your book yet, but I did read that amazing piece in the New York Times. Was that a couple weeks ago, the tennis piece?
Yeah.
I highly recommend that to everybody to just look up Sopan Deb's recent New York Times piece about tennis and put it into context with what you just heard. And then after you do that, use this link. It's a perfect segue that I just found myself. Use this link to order Sopan's book. There we go. Thank you again so much. Thank you, Sopan. And over to you now, Nancy Starr.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
Hello.
Thank you so much for doing this. I've been coming and enjoying myself just as a listener for week after week, so I'm really thrilled to be reading here. And I'm reading from my new novel, Rules for Moving, which came out just this past week. It's the story of Lane Meckler, who is an advice columnist online with adoring fans because she gives such great advice with such confidence. And what her fans don't know is that in her real life, she is a real odd duck. She always feels like an outsider and other than, and she's totally okay with that. She would have been a great social distancer. That's how she likes to lead her life. But she has a 6-year-old son named Henry who has just stopped speaking to everyone but her. And she realizes she really better figure out why she's always led her life at a distance so that she can help him. So that's who we're going to meet. But we're not going to meet, I'm going to read from the prologue, and we're not going to really hear from Lane directly. We're going to hear about her from another character, which is, I guess, really sometimes how we do learn about people in our lives. This part of the book is set in spring of 2018, which is either 2 years ago or 200 years ago, however it feels to you. What a headache. It had never crossed her mind that the house on Applegate Road, her neighbor's house, would end up to be one of those stubborn houses that just wouldn't sell. A gem of a place where everything went wrong. Today's problem, a pregnant woman. Dana had nothing against pregnant women. She'd happily led 5 perfectly normal pregnant women up and down these stairs this month alone. But this woman was so pregnant, 9 months at least, possibly 10, she could barely move. Dana could feel it coming. The prospective buyer's water was going to break right there on the recently re-cleaned round rug that sat in the center of the finally, once again, spotless foyer. She took a breath and reminded herself she had a fully stocked realtor's secret kit in the trunk of her car. While it was true so far the kit had only been put to the test on ink, coffee, and blood, she was confident, pretty confident, that it would be up to the challenge of amniotic fluid if it came to that. The woman's husband, who'd already made 2 jokes about how it wasn't his idea to move, was sluggish until he got to the basement. There, as if woken from hibernation, he charged into the utility room. A moment later, he slumped. There was nothing in Dana's secret kit to fix this. Cellars could scrub till their muscles were sore, but a clean boiler still wasn't pretty. Basements were so often like that, disappointing. She hustled him out and guided them both to the main downstairs space. Here's what I love, a blank slate waiting to be transformed. You see bare walls, I see magical playroom. Could use an update, she allowed. Whoops. Wow. Okay. 2 stony faces stared back at her. Normally she could connect with anyone, but these 2, nothing. It was the house. It made her nervous, like it was judging her. She brightened her smile. Ready to see the kitchen? You are going to be over the moon when you see the kitchen. Could use an update, she allowed as she watched them scan the maple cabinets, doors askew. But the beauty of that is you get to do it how you want. She saw the man glance at the 1 chipped terracotta floor tile. What counts is the bones. Floors you can change. If the bones are bad, nothing you can do. The air felt flat. She leaned toward the woman. Can I tell you a secret? This is my block. Trust me, I don't show this house to anyone I wouldn't want on my block. She saw the woman's spine stiffen. Don't worry, I'm a very respectful neighbor. I never pry. Come, let me show you the best part. She whisked them to the large window at the back of the living room. Look how big the yard is. Look how private. There's so much you could do with that space. Put in an outdoor kitchen, bluestone patio, farmhouse table, tea lights on the bushes. Oh my God, I want to come over to your house for dinner and you haven't even said if you like it. I like it, the woman said. Dana smiled. I knew you would. You remind me a little of Lane. That's the woman who used to live here with her son, Henry. Precious boy, 6 years old, face of an angel, dark curly hair, huge eyes, sweetest thing you ever met, even though he didn't talk. The woman placed a protective hand over her huge belly. Didn't talk? Smart as a whip, though, Dana quickly added, and talented. His drawings were deep, not surprising. His mom was deep. She used to write the Ask Roxy column. Ever read it? The woman shrugged. What did that mean? Did she not know the column? Did she not like the column? That would be a surprise. Even people who didn't like Lane liked her column. Lane rented the house from my favorite neighbor, Nathan. This was Nathan's divorce house, a totally amicable divorce. I guess the house started to feel too big for him, living alone, or maybe he just needed a change. Like I said, I never pry. All I know is one day, out of the blue, he's moving and renting the place out. I was the one who showed the house to Lane. Nathan was supposed to, but there was an emergency at his job. He's a voice actor for a video game. How cool is that? I don't know what kind of emergencies they have in video games, but an emergency is an emergency. He tried to reach Lane to reschedule. She was already on her way. The call didn't go through, so he called me. Everybody calls me because they know I love to help. Lane fell for the house the minute she saw it. A lot of people were interested, but Nathan is a mensch, so he rented it to her, which thank God, because you would not believe what Lane had just been through. It was, Dana caught herself. Icing on the cake, the two of them hit it off like you wouldn't believe. It was beshert. You know what beshert means? They didn't. Meant to be, soulmates, very unusual people, a voice actor and an advice columnist. People tell me I should write an advice column, which if I did, my advice to you, this is your house. The woman crossed her arms, full defensive position, all eye contact over. It was because of her stupid comment about Henry. Why did she tell a pregnant woman about a boy who didn't talk? You know, I misspoke. It's not that he didn't talk. He was a chatterbox with his mom. He just didn't talk to me, which if you think about it, was smart because once you get me going, you can't shut me up. I wish you could meet them. Such great people, salt of the earth, like you. They're at Nathan's summer place now on the Cape or Martha's Vineyard or maybe Maine. I don't know. I don't pry. A beautiful place is the point. This place is beautiful too. Stop talking. Move them along. Shall we step outside? Outside, Dana directed their diminishing attention to the newly installed top-of-the-line roof. Looks like slate, but it isn't, which means you don't have to take out a mortgage every time you need to replace a shingle. She pointed toward the stone below the clapboard. 100% Manhattan schist. Forget insulation. Nothing gets through Manhattan schist. A mailbox door creaked open. Their heads swiveled toward the house next door. A woman scooped out her mail and disappeared inside. That's Rory, my dentist. I know, she doesn't look like a dentist. She looks like a model, but she's a dentist. What a doll. Last month, I had a toothache in the middle of the night, and she met me at her office in her nightgown. That's the kind of block it is. Best block in town. Best people, best kids. The colleges the kids end up at? Amazing. I can get you a list. She was a moron. Parents didn't think about college until after the baby was born. What was wrong with her? What was wrong with her was this house. Selling houses wasn't hard for her. She was a positive person who saw the best in everything. All she had to do, all she ever did was tell it like she saw it. But this house, it was like sciatica. One wrong move and everything went out of whack. What kind of idiot tells a pregnant woman, the boy who used to live here didn't speak? She took a silent breath and went in for the close. You know how they say if the walls could talk? Well, these walls do. They talk to me. And what they're saying is, this house is for you. The woman thanked her and told her they'd think about what they'd seen. And the man said he'd get back to her, which was a bad sign because 9 times out of 10, when there was good news, it was the woman who called. Dana got in her car, checked her phone, and zoomed off to her next showing. The house on Applegate Road, a road with neither gates nor apples, was left alone with its memories of the people who'd lived there before. The man who did voices, the woman who gave advice, and the child with the face of an angel who didn't speak. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. You're going to see when you read the comments in the chat, and I was looking around and everybody was just laughing together at certain parts, even though it's silent. It's nice to see people's faces.
Oh, that's nice.
And I like that you took us to a time when we can see new places to live and dream about outdoor kitchens and things like that, which
Thanks.
hopefully we will be doing again, ideally, very soon. So Nancy's book, Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, but came out this past Tuesday, right? Just a few days ago?
That's correct.
Awesome. Okay, so I am going to send, there we go. There's the link for Nancy's book in the chat. Thank you again, Nancy.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to hand it over to Ivy Pochoda. Welcome, Ivy.
Thanks. Thanks, Paige. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks to all the lockdown lit people whose names I have seen in our Google group and on Instagram. And it's really great to be able to put names or faces to those names. And thanks to some of my friends I notice here. I'm going to read from my novel, These Women, which I'm quite lucky to have a copy of. It published on Tuesday. It's well, it's being called a feminist serial killer novel, but it's just a serial killer novel that focuses on what's important, which are the victims, not necessarily the killer. It's set in my neighborhood of West Adams in Los Angeles, and it's told from the perspective of 6 women who are in the orbit of violence and how they deal with living in the specter of extreme violence. Okay. I'm going to start from the beginning of the first section. There's some interstitial sections that come earlier, but this is the first chapter, and we're with a woman named Dorian. The girls arrive after dismissal. How old are they? 15, 16, 17? Dorian's lost the ability to tell. They flood the small fish shack, spinning on the stools bolted to the floor, splaying their bodies over the counter. They've rolled the skirts of their uniforms high, revealing thigh, even a little cheek. A flash of underwear trimmed with lace. They've unbuttoned their blouses, yanked down their polos, showing bra and breast. I could get, gimme, let me get a. Their voices pile on top of one another as they wait for their food. They're loud, performing, making a big deal of their adolescent selves. Dorian checks the temperature of the oil, making sure it's hot enough that the food crisps instead of sweats. The girls are growing impatient because the world isn't moving at their speed. Soon they're trying to outdo each other with their takedowns, their bold profanities. Bitch, whore, slut. Dorian slides them iced tea, soda, and double orders of fries. The girls' voices rise, twisting and tangling. Let me tell you what this bitch got up to last weekend. Don't you dare. This bitch? Who are you calling bitch? Like I said, this bitch went over to Ramon's place. Don't you say another word. Come on, you're proud of it. Don't tell me you're not. Or else, how come first thing you did when you got home was text me and Maria all the details? Dorian shakes the grease from another batch of fries. My order ready yet? How comes this shit is too slow? She dumps the fries into a styrofoam container. Bitch went down on him. Dorian drops the fryer basket, missing the grooves. Oil splatters onto her forearms. The girls are laughing, pinching each other, congratulating themselves on leaving childhood behind, leaving safety and sanity. Dorian turns, exiting the kitchen, and approaches the counter with the food. All you do is open your mouth and close your eyes. No big deal, like nothing at all. Dorian drops the fries. She reaches across the counter, her hand grasping the speaker's forearm. Leisha, she says. The girls fall silent, their invincibility interrupted. Get your hand off of me. Dorian holds firm. Leisha, she says, her voice brittle with panic. I said, get your hand off of me. Leisha, Dorian says, shaking the girl's wrist to stop her talking the way she's talking. Who the fuck is Leisha? She feels a hand on her own arm, the present reaching into the past. Dorian. Willie, her helper at the fish shack, is at her side, his voice soft but firm. Dorian, he says again. Dorian's holding fast, shaking her kid back to reality. Tell this bitch to get her hand off of me. Bitch. Leisha would never call her mother a bitch. Dorian lets go. Willie pulls her back to the kitchen. Easy, he says. Easy, easy. As if she's a dog that got too riled. The girls scatter, leaving their half-eaten food. The gate to the fish shack bangs behind them. Dorian can hear their voices mocking her as they hit the streets. 15 years later, nothing is going to change the fact that Leisha's still dead. Yet somehow the past keeps calling. Dorian puts her hands to her temples to settle her mind, sort imagination from reality. Still, everything remains tangled. The evening rush is over. Dorian drops some scraps into the fryer and turns up the volume on the radio. It's tuned to the classical station that plays the obvious hits of Mozart and Beethoven, and because this is Los Angeles, John Williams and Hans Zimmer. The fryer spits. Dorian shakes the basket. After nearly 3 decades of running the fish shack on Western and 31st, Dorian should be sick of the fried stuff. But if you can't stomach your own grub, you can't serve it. She shakes on a little extra salt, reaches for the hot sauce. Long ago, her customers stopped caring, noticing or remembering that it's a white woman running the fried fish place at the southern edge of Jefferson Park. If they knew she'd never had collard greens or catfish before she met Ricky on the other coast and allowed him to bring her cross country, they'd put it out of mind. If she told them she'd never cooked cornbread or fried okra in her life before Ricky died, they'd chosen to forget. Hold up. Someone's banging on the grate covering the kitchen window. I said, hold up. How many times I told you I don't like hot sauce on my fish? It's Kathy. Dorian knows the voice, a gravel sing-song that she hears up and down Western. Didn't want you anyway, probably too small to find in the dark. You buying or wasting my time. Dorian opens the back door to the fish shack. Kathy's standing in the alley. She's short, compact, like she did away with anything she didn't need. She's wearing a denim miniskirt, a fake fur bomber jacket, ankle boots with pencil-thin heels. She's pale and her bleached frizzy bob only washes her out more. My great-grandmother was raped by a plantation dude, she told Dorian once, and all I got was this yellow complexion. Then came the manic cackle Dorian could recognize from half a block away. Dorian didn't bother with the math to see if Kathy's story was even possible. The things she's heard from Kathy's mouth, the things she's heard from the rest of the women who work Western. Half assault, half work is how I'd tell it. No worse than choking on a raw sausage. Couldn't keep an umbrella up in a light wind. 3 seconds wet and sloppy, but done is done. Smells like the reptile house, and I know you know what I mean. There are more about the life, more about the men, more about the discomfort, the drugs, the antibiotics, the nightly bump and grind. After 13 years of feeding the women on the stroll, there's not much they can say that would shock Dorian. They try, though, make a game out of it. Dorian can run a late-night sex call-in show with the information she's gleaned. She could give a twisted anatomy lesson. She wedges the door open with her foot. Are you coming in? Hold up. Kathy squats down, getting close to the sludge running off the dumpster. She reaches out for something. When she stands up, Dorian can see tears in her eyes. She's holding a dead hummingbird. It's Acosta's, its purple crown slicked by the runoff from the dumpster. Dorian cups her palms and Kathy drops the dead bird into them. It feels impossibly light, as if minus its soul, it's hardly there. Fuck is it with the world, Kathy says. Beauty's nothing but a curse. That's what I tell my kids. She wipes her eyes. Dorian should have told her daughter Leisha the same thing, but Leisha learned that lesson before her 18th birthday. And there it is, the black flash of rage, a punch to the gut, a hand closing over her throat. You gonna feed me or not, Kathy says. Dorian holds the door open and stands aside. The kitchen barely fits 2 people. Dorian presses herself against the counter and Kathy slides past, taking the container of fish trim to the far end by the window. She eats with her hands, dipping the fish in tartar sauce and raising it to her lips, then licking the sauce from her fingers. Dorian gets a Pullman pan from the overhead rack. She places the dead bird inside it, then checks the temperature of the oven. It's 200, give or take. She slides the loaf pan in and turns up the heat a bit, like she's drying jerky. That's fucked up, Kathy says. It's how I save them. Save, Kathy says. That's a good one. How many you got now? On top of the refrigerator are 2 shoeboxes of dead birds, perfectly preserved and nestled in cotton wool. 28, Dorian says. Shit, Kathy says. I wouldn't want to be a bird around here. She takes a bite of fish. You gonna do something about this situation? What situation? Somebody's trying to fuck you up. Somebody's sending you a message. It's straight up cartel. Dead birds? Hell, I've seen girls do shit like that to other girls, back them off their turf. Seen pimps do worse. I'm not on anyone's turf, Dorian says. Seems like it, Kathy says, polishing off another piece of fish. She cocks her head towards the radio. The fuck you listening to? Classical. Let me change that. She swipes the radio, shifting it to the other NPR affiliate in LA that runs All Things Considered on a slight delay. Adira Holloway is talking. It seems that ever since the verdict was handed down about the death of her son, all officers found innocent, although they shot the kid at point blank range in broad daylight, the woman's been talking nonstop, swamping the airwaves with her rage. Dorian could tell her a thing or two about how the rage is senseless, how it accomplishes nothing, how all that screaming and anger only digs you in deeper, alienates you, makes people pity and fear you, as if grief is contagious. Bitch is pissed, Kathy said. Bitch is mad pissed. Wouldn't you be, Dorian asks. Hell, someone kills one of my kids, I'd kill a whole bunch of motherfuckers in return. No shame in that. Only shame in doing fuck all. Sometimes Dorian imagines there's a city full of women like Adira Holloway, women like her, a city of futile, pointless anger, a country, a whole continent. It's a fantasy she hates, but it comes anyway. It makes her claustrophobic, like she's going to choke on the proximity of all those grieving mothers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivy. Wow, that dialogue is incredible. And you do such a good job. I lived in Los Angeles for 5 years. You do such a great job of capturing just the diversity of the voices of that city and these women.
Thanks. Thank you.
Do you want to share the exciting news that you posted on social media?
Oh, about the, yeah, I mean, it's never a given. I guess the creator of The Handmaid's Tale was quite taken with this book and is trying to turn it into a TV show. But, you know, my husband works in TV, so I know the odds are always stacked against anything getting made, but it is just an honor to be considered.
But it was in Variety.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
No,
not
it's
just
legit. It's legit, but you never know. I mean, who knows?
I think it's very exciting. You'll have to tell us the second it's a go. When things can
Don't worry.
be filmed again. And
Thank
so
you so much.
Ivy's
It's
book.
been great.
Thank you. And so as Ivy mentioned, Ivy's book also came out this past Tuesday, and here is the link. So that concludes this evening of Bleus Literary Salon, the virtual edition. We will be back again next Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. Nairobi. I promise I'll have my green tea at 10 p.m. again, as I do every week. A huge thank you to all of the readers, to Nina and Rebecca and Sopan and Nancy and Ivy. Please buy their books using Bookshop to support independent bookstores that have also obviously taken a huge hit during this time. Keep reading, keep writing, and hopefully we'll see you next week. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks so much, Paige.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Paige.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paige.